Aha, we are here. We are here today. I've been waiting for this for a long time. Okay. So I want to start off with this really cool quote that I wanted to insert at some point while talking about these books, but I thought, this is a great quote to start with, actually. It's by a literary critic named James Wood. Here it is. Literature often differs from life in that life is amorphously full of detail and rarely directs us towards it, whereas literature teaches us to notice. Literature makes us better noticers of life. We get to practice on life itself, which in turn makes us better readers of detail in literature, which in turn makes us better readers of life. Nice to meet you. My name is Sarah. I'm here to talk about books. I'm here to talk about my favorite books of 2023. So 2023 was a good reading year for me. And here I want to talk to you about my favorite fiction books. Fiction. The ultimate escape, especially for winter. So I did rank them. Rankings, of course, are always a bit of a tricky thing. It's true that, the most recent really good read I put a bit higher up, maybe because it's more recent in my mind. I don't know, but I think it's relevant to tell you this. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just blabbering and it's all a bunch of bullshit and you just want to get to the books. The first book that we have is called Creature by Amina Cain. Creature is a short story collection. So at the back of this book, there's actually a really fitting endorsement from an author named Pamela Liu, in which she says, to be among Amina Cain's creatures is to stand in the presence of what is mysterious, expansive, and alive. And, if I could rate this book and if I could give it a review, I guess that would sum it up. What's interesting is that in this book there is no title story. There's no titular story called Creature. So it's almost as if the book itself, the compilation itself, was a sort of literary creature, and it does feel alive in that way. I really like this. This is very tiny. Most of the stories are readable probably in like 7 minutes. That's a very precise number. This is a very quiet, reflective book. And there's also quite some grotesque elements in it that kind of pop out. It's very spare. The prose here it's quite close to Hemingway's, actually, in a more feminine way. I think Hemingway was one of these first authors that made me fall in love with the spare prose style. And that made me realize how much feeling you could get out of the most naked skeletal sentences that you could come up with, and it's just about the right marriage of words, and I feel like Amina Cain does that excellently. I've actually discovered her first with her book on writing called A Horse at Night, which I will surely talk about. It's a great book on writing. I think she wrote a novel and a couple of short story collections, and this was the one that spoke to me most, and it was really not disappointing. The style makes you wonder whether the narrator is the same person throughout the whole collection. There's really this unifying feeling to it, and I guess maybe that's why the book title is not a story from the book. It doesn't stand out. It invites to contemplate the unity of it all. And what I find fascinating about these characters is that they always seem to notice the smallest things, the little details. And this is where the quote from James Wood, actually, that I read in the beginning, fits so well. I have here a few quotes for you from the book that I really enjoyed and to maybe convince you to get the book. Outside, I can see my past. Here is where I stood with a friend and talked about a movie. Here is the exact moment I knew I wanted to write. Here's the bed I slept in with someone I once loved. Here is the weather when I had bronchitis. Here is the emotion when I said goodbye. It's beautiful how long friendship can last. Even when it is awkward to be around each other, even when there is nothing to say, neither person wants to let go. I think this is because the body still remembers the relationship, and most likely the bodies keep it alive in spite of the mind. The best thing would be to spend time with each other physically, but this is not always possible or appropriate. The body remembers. The body wants to have its own relationship. The mind will have to say something about it afterward. Sometimes the mind doesn't have to say anything at all. So it suddenly got dark. I hope that doesn't interfere, but it's okay, whatever. So in the end of this book, there's an interesting story in which the narrator kind of slips into a sort of sexual romantic arrangement with a married couple, but you don't really understand what's going on you know, until you notice kind of these offbeat elements, and then it evolves and suddenly it's quite clear what it is, that, you know, that they're having a sort of threesome. But it's not at all sexual. It's quite spiritual, actually. It felt quite transcendental and quite interesting. It's a story that I will always remember, and I think it's because of this story that I'm putting it here right now in my top reads of 2023. Brilliant way to end the book. So the next book that I want to talk about is something I'm not sure I actually read in 2023. I know I read it either at the very end of 2022 or the very beginning of 2023. Or maybe it was the book that I read as a transition to the new year. So whatever. And this book is called The Light Pirate. The Light Pirate by Lily Brooks-Dalton. I have discovered Lily Brooks-Dalton from her book Good Morning Midnight. And that book is great. I loved it. It made me realize that I love these kind of contemplative space books. That's how I would call them, where there's astronauts contemplating life on Earth and what it means to be alive, beautiful sentences of what the astronauts are doing. So I was super excited when I learned that she was writing another book. And I was even more excited when I learned that the title would be The Light Pirate, because I was like, The Light Pirate, what the fuck does that mean? That sounds so intriguing and mysterious, and yeah, it did not disappoint. So The Light Pirate is a climate book. A climate fiction. I think that's how you would categorize it. It's the story of a girl. She's born in the beginning of the book where there's a huge hurricane in Florida. So it's set in Florida. There's a huge hurricane. Her mother is giving birth to her, and the hurricane is called Wanda. And so they name her Wanda. And so this is the story of Wanda and about how Florida is slowly sinking. There's even a place somewhere in her fictional town that's called the Edge, where the water has risen so much that there's like new frontiers. Their storms are getting bigger and people are fleeing. There's this sentiment of people going away, but there's nowhere else to go, because everywhere that they go there's actually other kind of catastrophes, natural catastrophes that are happening. So it's quite eerie, set in this very near future. This kind of fiction, it is a bit frightening, but I feel like we need these stories more than ever. And I love this book so much. And there's a beautiful quote from the book which sums up the book perfectly. What is magic but science that is not yet understood? Or what is science but magic with an explanation? This is one of the best sentences of this book. Told in 4 parts, power, water, light, and time, The Light Pirate mirrors the rhythms of the elements and sometimes quick, sometimes slow dissolution of the world as we know it. It is a meditation on the changes we would rather not see, the future we would rather not greet, and a callback to the beauty and violence of an untamable wilderness. I love this. This was great. Wanda has been at sea for long enough. She comes ashore, and when she does, the wind is no longer only wind. The wind is brimming, carrying 100 million grains of sand, pieces of shell, dead jellyfish, strips of seaweed, driftwood. Moving inland, carrying these spoils, she reaches down to gather more, bigger things, heavier things, dinghies and signposts and trash cans and tree branches. She grinds against the earth, swallowing the whole town. Rudder is part of her for long as she wants it, and everything in it is hers. Damn, this was a good book. So the next book I want to talk about is Mona by, I hope I pronounce this right, Paula Olohyarak. So this book was originally written in Spanish, and it was translated by Adam Morris. Very good translation. I love this. I remember seeing an interview of Paula Olohyarak online on YouTube, in which she was talking about the kind of literature that she likes. She was really into books that kind of stab you, and she really did this like stabbing motion. Like, Mona is a laid-back, pot-smoking, substance user writer, described, at least in the back jacket, as something of an anthropological curiosity, a Latina treasured for the flourish of diversity she brings to her department. So you already kind of get this satire vibes. She gets nominated for an award, a prestigious literary award, and she has to go to Sweden for it, and where she meets these other writers, and that she'll have conversations with, deep conversations. She'll go to bed with them. And yeah, she appears as this smart, fun-loving woman, and you kind of realize as you go through the book that it kind of gets darker. The ending is super weird. I did not see it coming at all. It completely blew my socks off in terms of what I was expecting, because I didn't expect it to go into this sort of, it sort of became surreal, literally. Like such weird things were happening. I can't even describe to you. If you like weird books such as Mona Awad's book, for example, I think you will really enjoy Mona. While you were talking, I was thinking, whatever distance we can put between ourselves and hatred, that's freedom. That's all the freedom we're likely to get. The bohemian lifestyle is this secular but sacred fantasy, right? When writers write, they aren't worrying about sustaining the culture. What they care about is finding that freedom. So their gift to the species, if you allow me, is their will to sustain that dream of bohemia. Writing is the only desire you can fully realize by yourself, alone with your mind. That's why there will always be writers. Our credo is that life can be a book, that I can be read and accessed by someone else. And writers are the evidence that life is a book, that it is written. Writers try to do something with what for the rest of humanity is just air. Wow, what an eventful day weather-wise. It's insane. There's never been so much sun in this spot this whole winter. And right now, here it shines, just for us. So there's no other way to introduce this book than by reading to you the first paragraph. "Tell me the truth," I said. "What truth?" he echoed. He was making a rapid sketch in his notebook, and now he showed me what it was. A long, long train with a big cloud of black smoke swirling over it, and himself leaning out of a window to wave a handkerchief. I shot him between the eyes. He had asked me to give him something hot in a thermos bottle to take with him on his trip. I went into the kitchen, made some tea, put milk and sugar in it, screwed the top on tight, and went back into his study. It was then that he showed me the sketch, and I took the revolver out of his desk drawer and shot him between the eyes. But for a long time already, I had known that sooner or later I should do something of the sort. This is how this marvelous gem of a book starts, and it is The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginsburg, sorry. Natalia, she is amazing. She's I mean, we're gonna make a video about her, obviously, at some point, just about Natalia Ginsburg. She writes in such a distinct manner that is kind of devoid of all sentimentalism, same kind of spare prose that I really enjoy, because when it's a good story, it goes straight to the point, and it punches you in the face in a way. This is what this book felt like to me, and all of her other books, a punch in the face in the best way possible, obviously, like all good books do. The Dry Heart is one of her darkest books, because she wrote it during the fascist regime, and so you really feel this kind of quiet rage that builds up in her character. A nameless narrator who basically kind of convinces herself to fall in love with this man that she meets named Alberto. This guy, Alberto, he draws a lot, he sketches, he's always in his study. So she convinces herself to fall in love with him in a way, just because this is what society says what a life is. You grow up, you study, whatever, you meet people, you meet a man, you fall in love, you have babies, you build a family together. And this is what happens. They sort of live together, and then they have a baby. And there is this tension throughout the whole book, because you know from the beginning of the book, you know that she's going to shoot him in the end. And so you're wondering, what could this man have done? What did he do? He has another lover, and she knows about it, and she confronts him about it. And there's kind of this casualness in him. You do see this feminist rage there. This kind of shows the general sentiment, I think, of many women in Italy in that era, in that time. And this was before the big feminist uprising in Italy, but it's still, you can see that anger brewing from within, and it's there in the narrator, it's there. And I thought it was an interesting kind of reversal of the usual marital collapse by death. We, especially nowadays, sadly, we still have a lot of deaths and murders perpetrated by the husbands to their wives. But this was maybe a way for Natalia to kind of take control through literature. The anger that she has towards the political regime, and also perhaps towards men. I don't know. Very good indeed. I thought how all of us are always trying to imagine what someone else is doing, eating our hearts out, trying to find the truth, and moving about in our own private worlds like a blind man who gropes for the walls and the various objects in a room. We're stupid and don't know what we really want when we're young. Life runs away with us before we know what it's all about. Oh, that quote really speaks to me for sure. The first time I read her, I thought I'm gonna buy all of her books. And I have a stack of Natalia Ginzburg that I'm keeping on the side. The best comparison I could give would be sort of Toni Morrison. Very different, obviously, in terms of style and prose and everything. But I love this kind of everyday... She writes about the everyday people, the average Italian at that time, with very, very keen insight into people's characters. Very keen observer of the multifaceted dimensions of people, and you can see that she has this sort of inner wisdom, inner knowledge about the people that she writes about. I love these books when and this is how I judge a really good novel, is when I close it and I'm like, that just happened. Like, I know it was a book, but in my head, there's a part of me that cannot let go of the illusion. You know, I cannot let go of the fact that it's fiction. It wasn't fiction. It actually happened. These are real people that we're dealing with. The Dry Heart by Natalia Ginzburg. When I started this book, I knew that it was going to be one of my favorites. But then I read the opening paragraph and I was blown away, and I thought, yep. I'm just gonna eat this up. And I did, and I underlined all of the passages. Like, every page is full of annotations. It was just so good. So this also, I think, would be the best to introduce to you by reading the first paragraph. Why is the measure of love loss? It hasn't rained for 3 months. The trees are prospecting underground, sending reserves of roots into the dry ground, roots like razors to open any artery water fat. The grapes have withered on the vine. What should be plump and firm, resisting the touch to give itself in the mouth, is spongy and blistered. Not this year the pleasure of rolling blue grapes between finger and thumb, juicing my palm with musk. Even the wasps avoid this thin brown dribble. Even the wasps this year. It was not always so. I'm thinking of a certain September. Wood pigeon red admiral yellow harvest orange night. You said, I love you. Why is it that the most unoriginal thing we can say to one another is still the thing we long to hear? I love you is always a quotation. You did not say it first, and neither did I. Yet when you say it and when I say it, we speak like savages who have found 3 words and worship them. I did worship them, but now I am alone on a rock, hewn out of my own body. I mean, you know, wow, that was good, right? It's a poem. It's a whole poem. The book itself is a poem, and the book I'm talking about is Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. It was my first Jeanette Winterson book, and I was wondering why I had never read any Jeanette Winterson before. It's so good. It's just so good. I love her prose. It was a wonderful discovery. I feel like the whole book is like this monologue to love, to eros, to pure eros and passion and desire, the eros that Sappho called bittersweet. We are talking here about a love affair between the narrator and Louise. I feel like novels that describe love between 2 men or 2 women are very special. Like, there's a special color to the affair. If you liked Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman, you would love Written on the Body. That being said, I understand how some people are not really into kind of lyrical books. When I remember this book, what I remember is just like fireworks of poetry. That's how I envision this book, and the cover actually is pretty damn good. Very well depicted. There's this red, whatever this is, nipple, vagina, flower, it can be anything. I think that whoever designed this cover was really, really on the money here. Here's another amazing passage from this book. I am living in a red bubble made up of Louise's hair. It's the sunset time of year, but it's not the dropping disk of light that holds me in the shadows of the yard. It's the color I crave. Floodings of you running down the edges of the sky on the brown earth, onto the gray stone, onto me. Sometimes I run into the sunset, arms wide like a scarecrow, thinking I can jump off the side of the world into the fiery furnace and be burned up in you. I would like to wrap my body in the blazing streaks of bloodshot sky. Intense. Wow. Break time. On to the top three. I'm super excited. So the next book, number 3, we have Enigma Variations by Andre Aciman. This was so good. I love this. This is such an underrated book. He's best known for his novel Call Me By Your Name. And on Goodreads, it's surprising because a lot of his other novels are not very well rated, or at least not exceptionally well rated. But Call Me By Your Name was like through the roof, and I loved it. I love his mind. I think it's the way that he sees things. Because after I read that book, I have read his essay collections. Longing would be the theme of Andre Aciman's body of work, I think. And I reverberate with that so much. I feel like longing is almost my identity. Andre Aciman was born in Alexandria, I think, or at least he spent his first years there. And in 1948, he, like a lot of Jews in Egypt, they kind of got shooed out, and so he went to live in Italy, and then he, I think, moved to New York. He has this kind of presence in his book that is never really settled in any sort of location. Place is a big theme in them. I presume that there is a sort of spirit here that you can clearly grasp as being Andre Aciman's. And I can only say this probably because I read his essays. But, I don't know the guy, so I'm just making wild speculations. Without further ado, let's talk about Enigma Variations. This is a story of a guy. The theme of this book is love. There's 5 loves in particular that he talks about, and there we have the Enigma Variations. In the beginning, he visits a town that he grew up in as a little boy, where he was, as a boy, fascinated and in love, kind of. Well, yeah, he had a huge crush on this wood builder. He was fascinated by this older man, and that's kind of the first glimpse we have of this character's longing for something. Then he goes on to another love story in New York. At some point, one of the stories that particularly touched me was a story called Star Love. They can all be read as kind of individual stories, sort of a compilation of short stories written by the same narrator. But I saw the thread here. I was really fascinated throughout. And Star Love is his kind of meeting this woman that he's had an intense love affair with when he was in college, and they meet every 4 years, but it's kind of his impossible love. It talks about desire, about how you're never really satisfied with what you have, of the fantasies of the lives that you've never led, and how sometimes these fantasies propel you to new realities, and you can trace your way back and it's too late. You've already made your choice. And these are the kind of questions and the kind of thoughts that fascinate me as a person, as a writer. These are the themes that I really navigate towards as well. So reading Aciman was very insightful. When I read his prose, I'm really inspired. It's similar to Jeanette Winterson in the fact that it's very lyrical. The prose is a lot of people call him a prose stylist. He has these long, winding sentences that are very much like his spirit, I suppose. The past may or may not be a foreign country. It may morph or lie still, but its capital is always regret. And what flushes through it is the grand canal of unfledged desires that feed into an archipelago of tiny might-have-beens that never really happened but aren't unreal for not happening, and might still happen though we fear they never will. But as I was about to stand up to walk to my office, I felt something almost like pain in my chest. I liked the pain. And once again, I wished my father were alive. He's the one person who'd understand the inflections of what I felt, the sting and the salve braided together like the twin serpents going at each other. This is love, he would have said. Diffidence is love. Fear itself is love. Even the scorn you feel is love. Each of us comes by it the wrong way. Some spot it right away, others need years, and for some, it comes in retrospect only. I remembered him standing at the dock, waving farewell as our ferry was chugging away from the island. Here was a sad man, I thought. Little did he know then that this would be the last summer of love. But knowing him as I did now, he must have feared, and indeed foreseen, it might never be given to him to find love again, which is why he treasured it until the end. I wasn't sure whether I would put this at my top one. I mean, my in the ranking that I wanted to give all these books, I wasn't sure how much I was willing to bump it up to number one. It was really hard because this one is also pretty good. So I'll explain. But they're both, this one and the one that I have decided to put as number one are both kind of genre-bending novels. Genre-bending works of literature. That's how I will call them. And I will tell you why. So this book is The Biography of X by Catherine Lacey, which is the most beautiful book I own. I mean, I love it. It's red. I love reds. Red has this panache to it. And the title is sexy. The Biography of X, super sexy. I love hardbacks, actually. I don't mind hardbacks at all. I just don't like hardbacks when there's this little flap and I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do with the flap? And I often, either if I keep it on, it's kind of all over the place and it gets dirty and stuff. And if I remove it, I'm kind of resenting the fact that there's nothing on the front of the book, because I like it when there's something on the front of the book. I like looking at a book and seeing the title and seeing the author's name, and I think that's cool. And so, you know, I'm I'm going on a tangent about how cool this cover is. It's so cool. All right. Anyway. The Biography of X is a fictional biography. It's part detective story, part alternate history. A widow investigates the life of this artist whose name is X. Iconoclastic, very famous, multidisciplinary artist who dies, and we don't really know her real name, actually. Her whole life was this sort of performance because X was the name that she was known for, but she had so many different names. She had different identities. They say that she is a polarizing shapeshifter. So her widow in this book is CM. We only have the initials. She explains in the beginning she just wanted to write this essay because there's a book that came out that claims to be the biography of her dead wife, and which for her was a bunch of bullshit. And so she was like, I'm gonna investigate my wife and who she really was. And you know, that kind of story opens a Pandora's box of secrets and scandals. It's so good. So X was really controversial. She was countercultural. She was the ultimate rebel. She would often criticize the system, and she would often criticize normalcy, just saying this big fuck you to the world, you know? And it's super interesting. You really have this kind of journalistic investigative tone. And what's really interesting to me was this description of the Southern Territories, because it's basically this world where the US, I think we're in the US, and it's divided into the Northern Territories where there's artists like X that can thrive, and the Southern Territory, there's like a big wall between these two. The widow is trying to figure out whether X was actually born in the Southern Territories. She tracks down her family, her parents, and kind of is surprised when at the people that she meets there. You have these really intense characters. The world that she created felt really real to me, and the characters are also fascinating. At some point, she talks about David Bowie and Susan Sontag, like, you know, very casual. My wife had a relationship with them, and David Bowie said this. And then you also have pictures in the book, which makes it quite realistic. A picture, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. This is supposedly a character named Cathy Boudin and X together riding motorcycles. Super interesting book, very unique. I highly recommend it for people that kind of like dystopian books. alternate history. Here is a passage that kind of depicts the character of X. It's one of the things that she answers to a journalist that is interviewing her. I'm not at all acting parts in these portraits, X told one journalist. I think because I'm an artist. My image will always come before me. I'm an artist. I'm a representation. I think that's the reason why people think that I am directing myself in a little story and acting a part. But this is not a character. It reminds me how interesting it is often how X is always contradicting herself throughout the book. She would say something to an interviewer and then she would say the complete opposite to someone else. And it's almost as if the death of X itself was the ultimate act. You almost wondering whether she just vanished or she just killed herself, or I don't know. It's an enigma. It's a really good book. Man, I'm gonna reread this. Biography of X by Catherine Lacey. Whoa! Number 1. I am so excited to talk about this book. It's so good. This is the kind of topic that I'm excited about, that gives me chills. I'm always into talking about this subject with people. And this is the subject of course, technology, artificial intelligence, and yeah, we could wonder whether it's a nonfiction book. In the beginning, I actually put it in my favorite nonfiction pile, but then I realized that it's not quite nonfiction, but it's not quite fiction either. It's the bit in the middle. It is The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut, who is an author from Chile, although I think that this is originally written in English. Benjamin Labatut wrote one of my favorite books of all time that I have discovered a couple years ago, titled When We Cease to Understand the World. And both of these books, The Maniac and When We Cease to Understand the World, are similar explorations of the minds of geniuses, of the minds of physicists, mathematicians. So interesting to explore these kind of characters. We don't meet these people a lot. Most of us will never meet people like this. You have a sort of fictionalized account of snippets of life of these characters. I love this blurring, this intentional blurring of the lines between fiction and nonfiction. I think it's part of the genius of the books, because the subject itself, the exploration between madness and genius, and you're wondering what is real, what is not real. And When We Cease to Understand the World, the first book that I read of him, it was about Schrödinger and about Heisenberg, and there was even this fictional scientist character that he wrote about in the beginning. And at the end of the book, you're like wondering, is it who is real here? What, if you don't know anything about this kind of stuff, you are supposed to wonder. Often these characters are on the brink of madness in the sense of they don't understand things anymore. Everything, like the meaning of life, just takes on such a different dimension because they're thinking of things that are completely alien to most of us. They're thinking in terms of the fabric of life, and I've always been fascinated by mathematicians because that is the complete opposite of my mind. Like I cannot envision, I do not have that logic, I do not have that capacity of thought. So reading about these kind of people and these kind of characters for me is so fascinating. So The Maniac is a literary triptych. So it starts off with the story of a physicist called Paul Ehrenfest. And then we go in the middle into a large section of the book about John von Neumann, and then the ending is more nonfiction. It's kind of like a long essay in which Labatut talks about the defeat of world Go champion Lee Sedol by AlphaGo, which was an algorithm, an AI designed by DeepMind, which is quite a. I mean, I already knew this story, but reading it in the way that Benjamin Labatut writes about it is something to give you chills. It kind of makes you realize how insane it is that there are now algorithms that can beat people, that can beat world masters at Go. First of all, if you don't know what Go is, it's a board game. And it's kind of like the complicated, This is a very simple simple way of describing it because I do not know how to play these games, but it's kind of like, it's a board game, kind of like chess, but with so much more grids. And also apparently in the game, wherever you are, depending on where you are, you have a different set of rules or something, if I understood correctly. And so the possibilities are literally unlimited. I don't know if it's in this book or somewhere else that I read that there was as much combinations in Go as there are atoms in the universe. Atoms in the universe. The universe. That's insane. That's completely insane. And so the fact that they created a neural network that beat the world champion of this, who is this intense guy that just thought in Go his whole life, blew my socks off. When he got defeated by the algorithm, he just quit. Which I don't know. I don't even have words. For me, this is the kind of stuff that I'm just like flabbergasted by. Back to speaking about the book. I'm starting to get fidgety, so I'm putting myself in all these weird weird positions. So von Neumann is described as this intense wonderkind who, at the height of his career as a scientist and consultant, he was completely swayed by money and by fame and by the power that his mind attributed him. He was the one who calculated the exact distance in which the bomb had to be detonated over Hiroshima. He also helped develop the Manhattan Project. He was said to often come by and give counsel and give advice to the people that were working on the project. What is interesting about the passages of von Neumann is that they're all written from the perspective of the 14 different people in his life, close friends, his daughter, his wife, other scientists, friends of his, and they all have this kind of full oral history and something to say about him. And they all describe several different facets of him. And this is the fiction part of this book that I greatly enjoyed, and I think ultimately the reason why I qualified it more, I guess, in fiction than nonfiction. But it was fascinating to see how the author gave different voices and different thoughts to these characters that are describing him. There's a really cool chapter written from the perspective of his mother, in which the mother is saying in the passage that, yeah, when he was just 4 years old and I was looking out of the window, he would just ask me, "Mom, what are you calculating?" What are you calculating? Like, I have a 4-year-old. And I can't even imagine him asking me that kind of question. So I thought that was really interesting. Last but not least, I want to read some passages of this book that made me think, that made me excited. Yeah, I think this is the kind of sentiment I get from this book. I think that's why ultimately it was between Catherine Lacey's book and this one. But this is the kind of subject that really fascinates and makes me really excited. And maybe not in the best way. Sometimes I'm like, this is crazy. What are we going to be like in 20 years? Cyborgs or something. I mean, best case scenario, we're going to be cyborgs, right? I don't know. Yancey left his most ambitious work unfinished. Before his mind began to slip away from him, he tried to create an all-encompassing scheme of self-replication that would unite biology, technology, and computer theory, and that would be applicable to life of any kind, both in the physical and in the digital realm, on this planet or on any other. He called it Theory of Self-Reproducing Automata, and worked on it till he could no longer hold a pen in his hand. He also believed that there was a threshold, a tipping point that, if surpassed, would kick off an evolutionary process in his machines, leading to automata whose complexity would grow exponentially, akin to the way that biological organisms thrive and mutate under natural selection. But there is a certain level beyond which the phenomenon could become explosive, with unimaginable consequences. In other words, where each machine could produce offspring of higher and higher potentialities. By crossbreeding and pollinating, they would eventually surpass us in numbers and perhaps, one day, reach a point where they could become rivals to our own intelligence. Their progress, at first, would be slow and silent, but then they would spawn and burst into our lives like so many hungry locusts, fighting for their rightful place in the world, carving their own path toward the future while carrying, in some deep corner of their digital souls, a trace whisper of my spirit, a small part of me, the man who had laid down their logical foundation. Well, in 2024, the age of AI, I guess, this is the kind of book that we do well to read. We should all be having more conversations about artificial intelligence, about technology, about how it's affecting our life, how it's completely shaping society. Maybe the discussion we ought to have is how to prepare for the imminent death of human species. I will just lock myself up in my bunker with all my books and I'll be fine. I am kidding. I do not have a bunker. It would be nice. At least, if ever the next pandemic hits, we have books. We have books! We have books. Alright, hope you like this video. Pleasure to get acquainted with the digital realm of the YT YouTube space era. And I'll be back to talk about more books. Yay! Goodbye. Oh no, this is not the fucking lie. Okay, I guess I'll just do it all over again. What is this clicking noise? Okay, sorry. We're gonna cut the hell out of this. Rudder is part of her for long as she... what the fuck? Cut it down a lot.